And welcome back to Sunday Square Off. Arizona Republicans won't be able to cast a vote for the president in next year's primary because there won't be a primary. Party Chair Kelly Ward formally canceled the March 2020 primary in a letter last week to Secretary of State Katie Hobbs. So is Ward's decision a winner for Republicans or for Democrats, who could have a wild primary? Joining us for our left-right debate, Julie Erfle, Democratic Communications Consultant at Erfle Uncuffed, and Nathan Sproul, Republican Consultant at Lincoln Strategy Group. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks
for having us.
So Kelly Ward was following a new state law that allowed her to cancel the 2020 primary. Also, over the last 25 years, 3 incumbent presidents have seen their Arizona primaries canceled. So Ward could do this. Nathan, the question is, should she have done it?
Sure. It's what you do when you have an incumbent in the White House. The Democrats did it with Obama in 2012, like you just said. Republicans did it with Bush in 2004. It's the right thing to do. It saves taxpayers money. The only downside of doing this is that, in my opinion, there's probably people that are in that independent category or maybe in the Democrat category who want to vote in a Republican primary. You might be able to get new young voters that you register. So you lose a little bit of that registration advantage around the excitement of having a Republican primary. But that's really the only downside. Other than that, she made the exact right decision.
Then they are registration drivers for both parties. But what if Bill Weld or Joe Walsh or Mark Sanford, who seem to be running opposing President Trump, gain some traction and it gets around to next March and it looks like, hey, these guys have some juice.
Yeah, or Fred Smith or Scott Williams, or I mean, you could.
We're not casting a vote for them.
None of them are going to have any juice going into the election. I think everyone knows that. Donald Trump is almost at 90% approval ratings among Republican voters. All of their campaigns are more vanity acts than they are real campaigns.
So, Julie, Republicans see a big advantage from not doing a primary. Is there a hidden advantage for Democrats in not having Republicans?
Sure, in that the Republican Party continues to be the party of Trump. And I think that that is a party that has gone way far to the right. And in a state where Trump's approval ratings are actually upside down, I think it is an advantage because basically what the party is saying to everyday voters is that we know you don't like Donald Trump, but we're not willing to entertain any other option. So I think that that could be an advantage for Democrats.
And just so voters know, if you want to vote in a party primary in Arizona, you have to register with that party to cast a ballot. So now the Democrats are the only game in town.
Correct.
Come March 17th, 2020.
Right.
And that's the point that I'm making about voter registration. I think there's a lot of people who lean Republican that, for whatever reason, are registered as a PND that might go back to being a Republican. And that gets into the tactics and logistics of how you run campaigns, because now you're able to see those are really our voters. And so it gives campaigns advantages that are now lost because that registration didn't happen.
Okay, let's stay with Kelly Ward for 50 points. She did that, cancel the primary at the beginning of the week. Later in the week, she had to defend her fundraising email in which she said, quote, "We have to stop gun grabber Mark Kelly dead in his tracks." And this began a kind of little fight with Martha McSally, Republican Senator, and former Republican Governor Jan Brewer. Here's what they had to say on KTAR. From McSally, quote, "In this climate, I think we all need to be deliberate with our words." She went on, "I don't agree with Mark Kelly, but those are definitely the words that I would not have used." The next day on the same show, former Governor Brewer was more direct. "What was she thinking?" Jan Brewer said to Mac and Gatos. "She's chairman of our party and she needs to revisit that. That was a little harsh, very harsh. I'd like to think that if I had done that, I would apologize and clean it up." You're a former executive director of the party. How unusual is this to have your senator and former governor calling out the chairman?
It's not normal, that's certain. And there is certainly a more elegant way to have said it. I wrote in the Republic several months ago that I think Kelly Ward still has a chance to be a very good state party chairman. She appeals to the grassroots, she creates a lot of energy, but because she was so high profile as a candidate for the Senate on different occasions and a high profile Republican in the state before she became state party chairman, she's going to get more of a media spotlight than the average person who serves in that chairmanship role. And I hope that this is an example of, we're still 12 months away from the election, and I hope this is an example of saying, okay, let's not make that mistake now or later when we actually have candidates that are about ready to be elected, because this is the type of distraction that in September of 2020, you don't want to have if you're Donald Trump or Martha McSally. You can survive it in 2019, but you don't want it in 2020.
And Kelly Ward went on the same radio station, different show, about 2 hours after Martha McSally spoke and said, basically, "Hey, Martha, why'd you go on that show with a bunch of Democratic losers?"
Right, which is really crazy because this really does pose a problem for Martha McSally. As I said, Trump's approval ratings are upside down. McSally has to moderate if she has any hope of beating Mark Kelly. And when she tries to say something as, common sense as we should just be more careful about the words we choose, and she gets attacked by her own party, that's a huge problem. I think this puts McSally in a very difficult position. And she needs to speak to people who are not just, Republican loyalists. How else is she going to win in an electorate that is really moderating here in Arizona?
All right, got it ended there. You can get us on the other side. When we come back, the jockeying to replace Bill Montgomery. The deadline to apply for his old job is this week. Get those applications in. Stay with us. And welcome back to Sunday Square Off. If you want to apply to run one of the largest county prosecutor's offices in the country, the deadline is 5 o'clock Wednesday afternoon. Better get going. A citizen review committee will make a recommendation from the pool of applicants to the Maricopa County Board. Then sometime in early October, the board will pick the person to serve former County Attorney Bill Montgomery's unexpired term through the end of 2020, and it does have to be a Republican. Welcome back to our left-right debate. Julie Erfle, Democratic Communications Consultant at Erfle Uncuffed, and Nathan Sproul, Republican Consultant at Lincoln Strategy Group, both with us. Let's not gloss over the fact this is a political decision by the county board. Agreed?
Oh, 100%.
100%. Good. The county attorney's job is on the 2020 ballot, so they're probably not going to pick a placeholder. They aren't going to pick somebody who's going to run.
I would hope so.
2020.
My hope would be that they would look at the field of candidates and pick the candidate who not only could make the best county attorney, but could also make the best candidate for 2020.
Okay, so if you're on the board, what kind of candidate fits the profile of somebody who could run and win a primary and general election in 2020?
Well, if you're on the county board of supervisors and you're trying to pick a Republican that we want to be the face of the Republican Party, and there's a Hispanic female that applies that is qualified to be county attorney, that person has to move up. If there's a woman who has crime-fighting credentials, that person has to move up as a candidate. But you also want to find somebody who has the political connection so that if you do put them in, and your goal is for them to be a candidate in 2020, that they're able to reach out to the donor community and they have that kind of a network. And so that the demographic may not fit the bill as much as are they able to raise the money to immediately attain that top-tier status, and nobody else can challenge that.
Julie, there are 4 candidates on the Democratic side already in the primary, more to come. What kind of candidate do you think can win in 2020 in Maricopa County, which is truly a purple county right now?
Right. I think name ID is going to be important, especially I've heard rumors that, for instance, Bill Gates may be interested in that position.
The county board chairman, who's a corporate lawyer, not a prosecutor.
Right, but also has high name ID, and so I think that name ID may be of importance, but it's got to be somebody who can convince voters that there has been a problem with integrity in that office, and they need to come in and they need to clean up that office. We had a former, Andy Thomas, who was disboard. We had Bill Montgomery, who sort of let a rogue prosecutor go. We've had a lot of controversy in that office. And so having somebody who can come in with, the legal chops, but also this really stellar reputation and this ability to clean up an office, I think is going to be really important. And that's really the message they need to sell.
But if you're looking for that person who has the political connections, who's been in politics before, who is able to reach out to the donor community and be a strong candidate, Bill Gates would certainly be at the top of that list.
Other names we're hearing? Other names?
Well, certainly the acting county attorney is going to throw her hat in the ring as well.
Right.
I think
Rachel Mitchell.
Right. I think she has the issue of having appeared on the national stage. And if you're looking at the 2020 campaign, that's a hurdle to get over. She clearly is qualified, very good at her job, but is that too much of a hurdle for the county board of supervisors?
Okay, got to end it there. When we come back, how nervous are Republicans about Joe Arpaio running for sheriff? Stay with us. And welcome back to our left-right debate with Julie Erfle, Democratic Communications Consultant at Erfle Uncuffed, and Nathan Sproul, Republican Consultant at Lincoln Strategy Group. So, on to the curious case of Joe Arpaio, the 87-year-old former lawman, pardoned by President Trump, is now running for his old job, wants to challenge Democratic Sheriff Paul Penzone for what would be their 3rd race in 8 years. How appetizing is that prospect to Democrats?
It's fantastic. Joe Arpaio is the gift that keeps on giving at this point. He's become a sideshow, and I think people recognize now that Joe Arpaio just wants to do whatever he can to get publicity. And so for Paul Penzone, this is just fantastic. So I say, run, Joe, run.
Run, Joe, run. Okay, as a Republican, Nathan Sproul, does that give you shivers?
I have a slightly different opinion.
Slightly, okay.
Yeah. Which, by the way, the name of your company is so much cooler than the name of my company, Earthly Unplugged. That's awesome. When it comes to Joe Arpaio, Republicans have a serious problem, because if he is the nominee and he's positioned to become the nominee, if the race stays as it is, he will be a drag in the entire ticket. And just like we were talking about the mishaps this week with the state party chairman and McSally, that is going to happen on steroids if Arpaio is the nominee. And both Trump and McSally should be extremely concerned about him being anywhere close to a microphone post-primary election day.
Okay, so how far does that concern extend? Are they trying to get somebody else in that primary? Because it's Arpaio and a couple of no-names right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's no doubt that Arpaio's numbers have deteriorated. He lost to Penzone in a heavily Republican county by a significant margin. And so the question really is, does a credible candidate think that his numbers have deteriorated enough in a primary so that Republican primary voters are now saying it's time for him to move on? My sense is that they have deteriorated significantly. It's just have they deteriorated enough? And I think this is largely going to be determined by white older voters in the Republican primary who say, is it smart for somebody that's going to be 89 years old when he gets sworn into office to be the one running the MCSO? And if older voters in the Republican Party say it's time for him to move on, doesn't mean that they don't like his policies, but it's just time for him to move on, then he's going to have a tough race.
What's interesting to me is it seems like Penzone's been a kind of a lowercase d Democrat and has actually had a pretty good relationship, or had a good relationship, with Bill Montgomery, and praised Montgomery's appointment to the Supreme Court. So I'd be surprised. For a while I was thinking I'd be surprised if you get a Republican opponent.
Well, I think that's where Arpaio is seeing this as an opportunity, right? Because he sort of occupies that other sphere, right? He's way to the right. He's kind of wants to go back to those very controversial times. And I think other Republicans are sensing that they're not going to beat Paul Penzone. He's had very favorable approval ratings, and he just is a moderate. He's cleaning up the MCSO, sort of one step at a time. And he's done nothing to warrant him being removed from that office.
You think Penzone's vulnerable to a strong Republican?
Oh, I think he's very vulnerable. I think if you just went out and asked the average person on the street, who is the Maricopa County Sheriff, you're still going to get Joe Arpaio as the answer. I don't think he's done anything to distinguish himself with the average voter, and now the race really then would become about turnout. If Arpaio is the candidate, then he wins the race. If it's any other Republican that's credible, then I think he's got real trouble.
All right, let's go to your fearless political predictions. Julie Erfle, I'll start with you.
So I think the Corporation Commission race is going to be one to watch. What's going on right now with APS is not going to fade into the headlines, and I think that will mean that we have 3 Corporation Commission spots open in this next election, and I really believe that 2 of those could be filled by Democrats.
3 seats up for grabs, Corporation Commission, in the wake of all this controversy surrounding APS. Nathan,
I think that's possible, but I also think that the Republican commissioners now have taken a harder line. I think the hearing that they just had with Don Brandt showed that. Mine is APS related too, but it's not so much a prediction maybe as it is a Christmas wish list kind of thing. Jeff Golder is going to be the new incoming CEO, and it seems like he's sending off smoke signals at this point that he's going to be a different type of CEO, and that he's going to launch very quickly an aggressive agenda that separates him from the Don Brandt administration in a big way. That's my wish, that's my hope, and I remain optimistic that he will do that.
You think even after the hearing 2 weeks ago when Goldner was non-committal on a whole bunch of things?
Well, he was right to be non-committal. He's not the CEO yet. So it's hard to hold him accountable for that. Once he becomes the CEO, if he gets asked, are you going to spend dark money in campaigns to elect your regulators? And he doesn't give an answer, then that's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
Okay, well, chances are they've either have the money spent by now or they don't. So they already know the answer, and we'll find out.
And what other campaigns are they spending money in as well? I think that's another very important point to talk about, is it's not just influencing Corporation Commission races, but other races as well, including and other issues such as education.
All right, got to end it there. Julie Erfle, Nathan Sproul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks very much to all of our guests, and thank you for joining us. See you back here next weekend for another round of Sunday Square Off.